surge in Iraq 15 years ago, was on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan over the weekend, and of course asked about the killing of General Soleimani, and he described that event this way.
What has happened here, I think, is frankly that we lost the element of deterrence, the component of deterrence that was seen as American will. Our drone, $130 million drone, was shot down, did nothing significant in response. 5% of the world's oil production taken out of operation, numerous attacks on shipping, and then attacks on our forces, ultimately, of course, killing an American and wounding 4 of our soldiers. So ultimately, the president appears to have decided that it was necessary to take an action to shore up deterrence, to show that we were not going to accept this.
Get our deterrence back, get our groove back, as it were. And that's what we've done, according to Petraeus. That's clearly the implication. He also described taking out Soleimani in terms of its importance thusly.
I mean, it's impossible to overstate the significance of the attack that takes out Qasem Soleimani and the #2 militia leader in Iraq as well, who also never dared to set foot in Iraq during the surge after we missed him and he escaped. So this is bigger than bin Laden. It's bigger than Baghdadi. This is the equivalent in U.S. terms of the CIA director, CENTCOM commander, JSOC commander, and presidential envoy for the region for Iran, and the most powerful figure in Iran for the solidification of the Shia crescent, and also the operational commander of the actions that they were pursuing.
That big. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thanks for joining us.
It's good to be with you guys.
Do you agree with General Petraeus' assessment about the importance of this strike against Soleimani?
Well, I do. I mean, 2 quick points I'll make. One is these are questions one should ask. Was it justified? I don't think any question that it was justified. Qasem Soleimani was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans, the maiming of many more, and hundreds of thousands of Syrians and others. He's responsible for terrorism acts around the world, from Argentina to Bulgaria to Thailand to France, and plots in the United States, which happily were foiled. So it was absolutely justified. As to whether it's wise, meaning whether it's strategic, I think there General Petraeus makes a very important point. Point is that it was necessary at some point, it seems to me certainly, to reestablish deterrence, which was no longer there. You know, if I tell you one quick story, in 1979, the revolution took place. As you guys may recall, I was there for a few months as a reporter covering the revolution. Left, and then in the fall, 40 years ago, last fall, the U.S. Embassy was taken over by followers of Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the first supreme leader. He watched what happened. He saw that Carter was feckless. He said famously, "The Americans can't do a damn thing." That's been a slogan recited ever since. In fact, on January 1st, just a few days ago, in response to Mr. Trump's vow to hold Iran's rulers fully responsible for any lie that might be lost at the besieged U.S. Embassy in Baghdad this time, not Tehran, but Baghdad, the new supreme leader, which is Ali Khamenei, his official website proclaimed, "There is no damn thing you can do." Well, President Trump showed there is a damn thing you can do. The leading terrorist of what a Republican and Democratic administrations alike have long said is the leading terrorist, state-sponsored terrorism in the world, he has been eliminated. I think that's an important thing to do now. Is it, if you don't appease, if you don't feed the alligator, is it possible the alligator is going to attack you? It's absolutely possible. You have to decide how you're going to handle that situation.
Well, and he said on Air Force One last night when he's coming back to D.C. from Mar-a-Lago, saying they've allowed to kill our people. They're allowed to torture and maim our people. They're allowed to use roadside bombs and blow up our people. And we're not allowed to touch their cultural sites. It doesn't work that way. Do you think really he should focus on these cultural sites that he mentioned?
No, I don't think they should focus on the cultural sites. I'm not quite sure what he means. I think it was not a smart thing to say. I'm somebody, if we're talking about Iranian culture, which it's an ancient culture, long precedes Islam and certainly the kind of Islam that is represented by the current supreme leader and the previous supreme leader, that's very different. I don't want to touch that. I'm in favor of Iranian nationalism. Iranian nationalism is a good thing because the Islamic Republic of Iran is the enemy of the Iranian nation. Khomeini was very clear about that. He said that patriotism is paganism. What do you mean by that? He meant you don't worship a nation, you don't love a nation, you love Allah. He said, let this land, meaning Iran, burn, if that means that Islam will be dominant in the world. So, look, this president is often loose with his lips and doesn't say things clearly and is not precise in his language. If he's talking about destroying things that are important to the Islamic Republic of Iran, important to the supreme leader, that's fine. I think cultural, that's the wrong word to use. Again, I'm not sure what he meant, and not the first time he's used the wrong word. What he should, what I imagine is happening now, two things. One is Ayatollah Khamenei is considering, and they've said 35, they're looking at 35 different targets that they might want to hit. I also think that President Clinton is being presented by the intelligence community and by the Pentagon with a menu of targets we might want to hit in retaliation. I don't think we're talking about boots on the ground. We don't want to occupy Tehran, of course not. But you imagine, for example, sinking their navy, which is used to harass shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. That navy could sink to the bottom of the harbor. You can imagine their air force. It's not huge, but being destroyed on runways. You can imagine some of their nuclear facilities where work on nuclear weapons that they deny has been taking place. You could take those out of commission. There's a lot of you could do in order to make them understand that they do not want to climb the escalating ladder because they will not get to the top before we do.
And just with respect to some of the hysterics from the left about World War III and about reinstituting the draft and millions of soldiers and this and that, you could just give us a bit of an assessment and insight on what the capacity to do some of those things is with our military guys operating joysticks from sheds in New Mexico as opposed to having boots on the ground.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have. There's no reason. There's no interest. It would make no sense. I'm quite confident. We don't want to occupy Tehran. We don't want to take over that country. We don't want to be we want the Iranians to liberate themselves. They want to do so from this despicable regime. There have been protests that have broken out in hundreds of cities. I'm sure there are differences with the country. I'm not sure they can do it. It's this regime that we oppose, and clipping their wings, hurting their power. That we may want to do. We don't. Listen. This should be easy for people to understand. The ultimate goal of this regime for 40 years has been stated plainly. It is chanted in mosques every Friday night by clerics who are loyal to this regime. The chant is death to America. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the intention. They have not had the capability. They've done us quite a bit of damage, but they haven't. How do they get the capability? Well, nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them to targets anywhere on Earth through the use of ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. That would be very useful if they want to match the capability of their intentions. So we don't want them to have that. They can remain a weak nation. We can continue to screw them economically. They're just not a powerful nation economically. They're much better now than they were before President Trump took office. He took a very different view of this than did his predecessor, President Obama. President Obama thought, as an experiment, that he could appease them, that he could buy them off, that he could show them respect, give them power, give them money, pallets of cash on airplanes, billions of dollars in trade, and tell them that they could share the neighborhood, quote unquote, with Saudi Arabia. And he thought that would be enough for them. They'll accept that. They'll be happy with that. And they weren't. One illustration that occurs to me all the time is 2015, the JCPOA, the Iran deal, was concluded. Early the following year, just months later, what happens? They capture two naval vessels of ours. They take the sailors. They hold them hostage. They publicly humiliate them.
Right.
Eventually, they give them back, and John Kerry says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." That's what they want. When you'll often hear what they say is they want to end American arrogance. What they mean is Americans should know their place. They should. This is an imperialist regime is trying to reestablish in the 20th century a great Islamic empire that they would control, one that would be dominant, one that would put the Crusaders and the Zionists and other infidels and the Muslim heretics in their place. That's what they're about. This is not something, and again, the experiment was tried. President Obama to say, isn't there get along, coexist, treat each other well? And they said no very clearly.
One other thing General Petraeus said on Face the Nation was, he's basically saying, now I want to know what's next. What's the Trump administration's next decision after this? And he suggested that a smart decision would be to open up diplomatic channels now. Now that they know that where the line is, and that you can test or push President Trump only so far. Now it would behoove President Trump to lead the move to open diplomatic channels and try to negotiate a de-escalation.
Well, I disagree, but it's not true that we haven't had diplomatic channels all along. There's an Iranian ambassador in New York to the UN. We have an intersection at the Swiss embassy in Tehran. The Europeans talk to them and have relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Iraqis, of course, do as well, because the Iraqis, as you know, have been trying and may succeed in taking control fully.
But making the first, making the first overture, maybe, is what he was referencing.
Well, listen, it's worth considering. I'm not sure what that overture would be. He said, and I think Mike Pompeo has said many times, we're willing to sit down and talk with you. We're willing to negotiate with you. But it's got to be, we need realistic negotiations. And we're not going to pay a price to have you come to the table or to send Foreign Minister Javad Zarif to Vienna to take dinner at a fancy restaurant with our Secretary of State. That's not how it works. But we'll sit down and talk anytime. I think he can reiterate that. But I don't see that would be anything very new. We're not going to apologize.
No, but Cliff, this morning CNN had Iranian government official on saying we are going to strike back, but we don't want to go to war with you. So it's like they have to kick back, and then that's it.
Yeah, that may be. Listen, there's two things that come in. Ayatollah Khamenei is extremely. First of all, look, he would like revenge. He was very close to Soleimani. Who for 20 years was his right hand, maybe something of a son. He was his sword of jihad out there, and he did not. And they got too complacent. They did. Soleimani would walk around and take selfies of himself in his tailored uniform. The predator doesn't think he has any danger from the prey. That's why Petraeus is talking about reestablishing deterrence. But he also has to think strategically beyond revenge. He has to think, how much do I want to poke the bear, enough to make him, that I get over this humiliation and get some revenge, but not enough that he may think Trump has shown that he can be unpredictable. And again, for 40 years, Americans were very predictable. They cannot do a damn thing. Americans get killed in Iraq by Shia militias instructed by Soleimani, and guess what? Nothing happens to them. Nothing. They try to blow up a restaurant, Georgetown, here in Washington, full of diners and full with Saudi ambassadors there. And President Obama says, well, in time, I'm sure they'll pay a price. But, of course, they never did pay a price or anything else they did. So he needs to think carefully. Is it possible President Trump will do something like say, do we know where the supreme leader is? And can we hit him in his bed? And maybe he would do that. So he may want to be careful how far he goes in terms of revenge. One thing he may consider is he knows now that a red line for this president is killing actual Americans. The American that was killed most recently was a contractor. A lot of people think, oh, it's just an American contractor. That's not important. We're angry about that, like we were about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi who was writing for the Washington Post. That makes us a contractor, American soldier. Well, what do you do? That's not how President Trump views it. So one thing they may do is they may try to take this out not on an American, maybe on the Saudis, maybe on the Israelis, maybe on, who knows, on maybe in Europe, someplace else, and think that way President Trump won't be angry enough to retaliate. And maybe that's accurate as well. But they have to think, we want revenge, but strategically, are there things we could do that will make this situation worse for us? We don't know how rational they're going to be about this, how emotional